look, more Hearthstone mini set cards to review. Today we got some Shaman cards from the Play Hearthstone folks. We got some Paladin cards from the Fishu, and we got some Rogue cards revealed by Warshack. So let's jump into these Shaman cards first. This is Shaman, and we got a big old boy, the Rocket Hopper, a 5-mana 10/10 beast with Rush and Overload 4. That is a very, very pricey Overload, of course. But you get a big old stat line, right? And I'm like kind of intrigued by this card despite the crazy Overload on it. This is just such a monster threat. It has some of that immediacy that we sort of like. And it's coming down early enough that sometimes, you know, this like cleans up a little 3/3 or something, and it just creates problems for the opponent. And they have to solve this problem or they're going to take, you know, maybe 10 to the dome. The issue, of course, is that Overload 4, because you want to turn 6, you're only going to have 2 mana left over after playing the Rocket Hopper. I don't know that this makes up such an advantage on turn 5 that it's worth that turn 6 downside. Now, that said, we have cards to mitigate that, right? We have Overdraft that's in standard. As we know, we've seen this popping up sometimes in Nature Shaman lists. You can just throw one of these on turn 6 and delete that Overload punishment. Then you get this monster 5-drop. You actually get a really nice Overdraft, right? Especially if you're already pressuring the opponent for 10. You could maybe use this to clean something up, a taunt or something in the way. But it actually makes your Overdraft a pretty good card just because suddenly it's dealing 4 for 1, which you like, and you got the upside. There's also Thorum, which doesn't make as much sense on curve, of course, because you only have 2 on 6, and this guy costs 3 to play. But you know, there's still, you know, other moments where this might be good. Play the Rocket Hopper on 6, coin some Thorum out, whatever it is, right? There's still lines too where Thorum could be good. And again, you know, even if you're playing this later in the game, Rocket Hopper on 7 or 8 or whatever random turn, that 4 Overload actually turns your Thorum into an insane card because now he draws 4+. Just starting him at 4 card draws is crazy. So when you start to think about the Overload as upside and as something that's mitigatable, that can be mitigated, that's definitely how you say that, then it's like intriguing. I'm getting this monster with some upside. And don't forget too, we just have like Overload synergy stuff that's still in standard chilling. You know, we've got like the Inza package. Not that Inza would let you play Rock Hopper on 4, but you could play it 4/4 later in the game, you know, weaving it into a turn alongside something else. So I don't know, man. I'm like keeping an eye on this one. This actually could let you play your Rocket Hopper for 4, which would be kind of nuts, right? Play Rocket Hopper on 4, Overdraft on 5, get that 4 mana back. There's some interesting little lines there where this might just be rewarding enough to kind of give that an edge. Now, you know, the problem is this is kind of going to have to bear the weight of that entire deck on its back right now, because we know right now Overload Shaman's not a good deck. Is this card good enough to get it over the hump? I don't think so right now, right? It doesn't feel like this is going to like suddenly propel it to success. But this could be the first piece alongside some more Overload stuff that does come together. And this could be a big help eventually for making that deck kind of relevant. So I'm keeping my eye on the Rocket Hopper here. Like, you know, just as a standalone card you put in a regular non-Overload deck, no way. I don't think it's worth it. The Overload's too punishing. But when you start to cook in that Overload space, I start to get a little more curious for this one. I think it does have some potential. So moving on here to the Murloc Grouse. This one's a pretty cool card. 1 mana 1/1 Murloc with Gigantify and Battle Cry. Summon a tiny fin with Rush and stats equal to this minions. And I think this just looks good, dude. You're getting 2 1/1 bodies for 1. That's already a recipe that we've seen succeed so many times in the past. But one of these has Rush as well, which is even more upside on these kind of 2 1/1s for 1. You don't even necessarily need that in a Murloc deck. Of course, it makes sense in Murlocs, but I think this is just one of those good generic early game body sort of cards. And then, of course, you've got the gigantic version as well. And I will say with this one, the nice thing about this card is the front half is good. You don't need the gigantic to necessarily be worth it. You're just happy to play the front half. A lot of these gigantic cards, it sort of feels like the first half wasn't that good. And it's like you're trying to realize some benefit on the back half. That's not the case here. I think you're just happy to run the first half, and then the second half, it's like there might be moments that's great too. You might just find yourself with, 8 mana, not a lot to do, and you get a couple 8/8s on board, maybe trade into your opponent's 5/5, with that second rush minion, and you're in a great spot. Now, on top of that, even the Growfin itself has the chance to grow alongside the game state, because we've seen some sort of hand buffs in Shaman. We got that big spell that buffs everything by 2/3. Keep in mind, this is summoning stats equal to this minion, so it's going to scale with any sort of buffs. So if your Growfin, gets a nice 2/3 buff, you're going to get a 1 mana 3/4 that summons a 3/4 with Rush, which is great. So this even has like some of that potential where it becomes a solid card later in the game as well. And this isn't even to speak of any potential Murloc synergies that might pop up too. That's something that's been rarer lately, but you always have to keep that in the back of your mind. Who knows when we'll get like a water themed expansion or something, and Murlocs are everywhere, and this card's just absolutely bonkers. But I think it has a lot of potential outside of that as well. It's sometimes hard for cards like this to actually make the cut in standard, just because decks are so synergistic and you have to run the perfect synergy package to actually get there. But this is just general use enough. I could even see this popping into Reno lists, which we've had some Highlander Shaman see a little bit of success. And of course, I think it has potential to even make it into regular lists too, just as a good early aggressive kind of body. Probably nuts in Arena too. I can imagine this just being completely insane in Arena with a Growfin. So pretty much a solid all-around looking card to me. Finally for Shaman, it's Wave of Nostalgia. I really like this card and name a lot. It's a 5 mana nature spell. It allows you to transform all minions into random legendary ones from the past. So this is going to affect both your board and your opponent's board. So this is sort of in theory, kind of an evolve and devolve baked into one, kind of like Primordial Wave a little bit. We also had like the Stormbringer from long ago that would transform your cards into legendary minions. So this one's kind of intriguing, right? Because there's just a lot of unpredictability baked into this. Legendary minions are a real mixed bag, especially ones from the past. Cards have tended to get better over time. So a lot of like old legendaries are just not good. You're gonna get some like Himits and stuff that aren't great, but if you're transforming a board of 1/1s or whatever, you got some Growfins on board, you're not going to care. Like, you're probably going to get better minions on average. Yes, there will be some random little 3/2 Zephyrses and stuff in the mix that do nothing, but there will also be some like 5/5s and 8/8s and stuff that just come along for the ride. A Boogie Monster, for instance, might have been a terrible card in Hearthstone, but it's pretty good if you get it off Wave of Nostalgia. Now, that's in a scenario where you're ahead on board, right? This becomes a kind of super expensive evolve in a way, and sort of inconsistent evolve at that. But it can also, disrupt your opponent a little bit. We've seen stuff like, Brand Warrior summoning Ziliaxes, right? And they want that Ziliax to die so that it's in their Inventor Boom pool, and then they bring it back to life, and they, hit you for 1 billion and clear your board and heal for 1 billion. And the game is over. Well, with Wave of Nostalgia, you can transform those Ziliaxes into garbage, right? They're just going to be a bunch of junk. It might still be decent minions, but it won't at least be resummonable. The challenge is that it doesn't really deal with the problem of their board. You transform 2 Ziliaxes into a Ragnaros and a Cairn, and you still have a problem. Like, you need to spend more mana and more effort to actually solve that board state. So using this as a devolve seems incredibly situational and incredibly weak, frankly, very often. Yes, they will also sometimes get that 3/2 Zephyrus, but they will also sometimes get that Boogie Monster that's actually kind of annoying if you have to spend even more mana to solve it. So I think you really want to try to use this offensively, but even then, it to me feels a lot worse than just some of the other evolve style cards we've seen. It feels like the results are just too unpredictable. The synergies will be too random on all these kind of mixed bag cards. So I do unfortunately think Wave of Nostalgia looks pretty limited in its utility. I don't expect this as a card we'll see a lot. I will say though, it looks very fun. I like the art a lot, referencing these old characters. I like the idea of getting a Cthulhu and a Ragnaros off of this, maybe even a Brand to boot. That could be an achievement. Seems impossibly unlikely, but would be pretty cool. All right, so moving on to Paladin, we have the Flickering Light Bot, a 3-mana 3/3 mech with Gigantify, and it costs 1 less for each holy spell you've cast this game. And then, of course, the gigantic version is an 8-mana 8/8. So, you know, theoretically, here's some ways to recover some tempo and some board if you're spending a lot of time and cards on holy spells. Do note this is for the holy spells themselves, not for mana spent on the holy spells, with some stuff we've seen before, like Garden's Grace, which I do think is going to slow this down a lot. When you look at the holy spell pool in Paladin, I'm sorry I don't have it pulled up, but a lot of stuff in that kind of 2-3 mana range, which means, you know, you're going to be often spending like 2 or 3 mana for a 1 mana discount on the light bot. Now, it kind of helps that there are 2 bodies here, right? So you're kind of getting 2 mana of discounts each time because it is this game. So no matter when you play the first light bot, the second one is going to come pre-discounted, basically. So that kind of helps, but at the same time, I'm not that excited about the first half of the Flickering Light Bot. Like, even a 0 mana 3/3, like, okay, it's cool, whatever, you know, it's fine, but it's really not doing much. It's that second half you really want to get to a cheap point where you can start to snowball off that, and, you know, that's going to create some big swings and some high pressure sorts of moments. But I think about this today, like, you know, with Paladin summoning Sea Giants so early, so easily with like Flood Paladins, that comparatively it just feels like this is going to take forever to serve that same sort of purpose. Like, if you're spending 3 mana on holy spells, how many turns do you need in order to get your Flickering Light Bots to a reasonable level? Now, we are going to look at a holy spell a little bit later in the review here. I'll just show this now. Holy Glowsticks. This one can cost 1 if you've played a holy spell on the same turn as you're playing it. So, you know, little stuff like this does help. You know, it's suddenly a 1 mana card that gets you a 1 mana discount on each of these. That feels more efficient, but I don't know that you're going to be able to weave enough of these together fast enough. Or even more challenging, perhaps, is building a cohesive deck that has a high enough density of holy spells. Because if you're just playing holy spells, you know, some of them are buff, some of them are removal. It's like hard to fuse all of that together into a package that makes sense. This is one that could get better as you get more and more holy spells added into a pool, because we're currently, you know, in a 4-set meta early in the year, but eventually we'll be, you know, in a 6-set meta with more holy spells to pull from. So, like, keep an eye on it, but I'm just worried it's going to take too long, because also, if it does take that long and you've got this weird deck that's like kind of got some minion pressure off your light bots and maybe some other mechs and some holy control spells, what are you, and why does an 8/8 coming down on turn 7 or whatever matter in that deck? Like the Flood Sea Giant stuff, that makes sense. That deck's trying to be super aggressive and the Sea Giants come down early and create that pressure. Lightbot doesn't do that. It doesn't have things like Lifesteal or Taunt or Rush to help you recover in a slower game plan that's probably going to encourage these sort of discounts. So ultimately for me, it just feels like a little bit of a fit problem and a speed problem for this one. I'm not writing it off completely because, you know, more stuff like Holy Glowsticks could just push this in that direction. This might be a teaser for a really hard synergy push for holy stuff. Then, of course, it'll make sense. Some of that's just up to the design whims of how hard they push synergies. But as it stands, I think this card has some challenges, particularly right now. So next up is Wacol, a new spell for Paladin. It's interesting. Wasn't the Wacol Hammer a card for Shaman back in the day? Interesting. I guess they both enjoy Wacols. This lets you discover a Paladin weapon from the past and gives it +1/+1, which I think is kind of intriguing, right? This lets you maybe find a weapon that kind of fits your curve, number one. There, on average, will be around the middle point of a curve, of course, but there are some more expensive Paladin weapons in the old past pool, alongside, of course, some cheaper ones as well. So I think there will be some flexibility, which is nice. You know, sometimes you might just want to grab a weapon for like turn 2 or 3 or whatever, just because you're desperate for a play. Late in the game, you might want to try to get one with a little bit more meat on the bone. If we look at like wild Paladin cards, some of these will be modern, but, you know, a lot in that kind of 3 and 4 range, but also some big honkers in here too. You could get a Valenier, for instance, which is pretty sweet. A 5/3 Valenier is cool, although that one you actually kind of don't want to have extra durability on it. But, you know, Hammer of the Naru at 4/4 is pretty cool. Some great examples, right? Now, there are, of course, some bad weapons too, like Light's Sorrow is pretty bad. But because it's Discover, you're going to be able to mitigate some of those downsides and try to pick a weapon that's fitting. And I don't think, you know, you're ever going to be offered 3 weapons where the worst one with a 1/1 buff is a bad card. Like, I don't know that there's any example where even Light Sorrow with a 1/1 buff. It's still a 2/5. It's not exciting for 4 mana, but you know, it's doing it. It's you know, it's 10 damage, right? It's doing something. And most of these will be kind of like 4/3 weapons for 3 and stuff, or 3/4 weapons for 3, which is a really good little spot with some occasional bonus upsides as well. So in other words, I think this actually looks like it's pretty nice, you know. Gives you some flexibility, some good fit for curve moments, and that 1/1 buff just kind of shores up any weaknesses alongside the Discover, so you make sure you get something that's relevant. So actually a fun card too. It's nice to just revisit old cards we don't see much as standard players. So I like this one from a power level standpoint and from a fun standpoint. This seems like a good card. All right, so now let's take a look at Holy Glowsticks. This is 4 mana Holy Spell with Lifesteal, deal 4 damage, and it costs 1 less, or no, not 1 less, costs 1 if you've cast a holy spell this turn, which of course makes this a very cheap 1 mana deal 4 with some recovery as well. This can of course notably go face and hit minions, which is kind of nice. It can go face because sometimes you know, if they don't have a board and you still want to play this to like discount your light bot or whatever, sending it face isn't going to feel bad, particularly since it can also heal you up a little bit. So, I mean, this is just, of course, an incredibly efficient card, and I think this one actually makes sense outside of any sort of light bot forced thing. If you're a slower Paladin deck, if you're running holy spells anyway, this is a way to, you know, help you stabilize, help you clear stuff, you know, help you serve as removal. Frankly, even if you're running an aggressive Paladin deck and you have some buffs or auras or something, right, that are holy, and you're playing them for your aggressive deck, this could actually be like a Soulfire, right? Like this could just be some reach and damage for Paladin decks that sometimes historically have had trouble going over the top. They often rely on that minion damage. So I think this card actually has kind of utility across both worlds. Holy pops up enough in those aggressive decks that you can probably get this down to 1 sometimes. And then of course in slower decks, this one just makes a lot of sense too. So moving on over to Rogue here, we have the Dust Bunny, a 3 mana 3/2 beast. This is really cool. Battlecry and Death Rattle. Add a random piece of junk to your hand. You get a coin, which we all know that gives you 1 mana for 0. You get a rock, which is a 1 mana spell that deals 3. That's from like, I don't know, various treasure stuff, I think. You can get a banana, which we know is a 1 mana spell. Yeah, 1 mana spell that gives you 1/1 buff. And you can get a knife, which I believe in this case is basically Rogue's hero power weapon, which is a 1 mana 1/2 weapon, which is cool, right? This is just little fodder stuff basically to, you know, maybe help you get some little combo pieces. You know, some of these, of course, coins can have a lot of utility. Rock is frankly very good as a 1 mana deal 3. That could just be some damage to send face. And of course, you're getting 2 of these with your Dust Bunny. So I don't know, this is really intriguing, right? Because it's just like value, but it's junk. It's not like a ton of raw value out of your Dust Bunny. So are you able to turn this into enough upside, right? Because you are spending 3 on a 3/2, which you probably aren't pumped about. And I would say some of these, you know, like the knife is like, it's gonna be kind of hard to use that, right? Yeah, it can enable combo unlike your hero power. Yes, it's a little cheaper than your hero power, but ultimately it is just kind of a weak weapon at the end of the day. So another thing I was thinking about for this is just like, you know, if you fill up your hand with enough cards, stuff like Gaslight Gatekeeper becomes more intriguing because you've added 2 bad cards to your hand and then you swap those out for good cards in your deck. We've even seen some of the like giant rogues where you're drawing a bunch of cards and playing super discounted giants. There's also, I guess we should talk about the Twisted Pack, which can do another similar thing. We talked about this in Warrior yesterday, where you're adding these 5 random cards from other classes to your hand. You can do that. You can get some Dust Bunny junk and just like swap all of this garbage out for real cards in your deck with a Gaslight Gatekeeper and some kind of giants that get super discounted because you're drawing just so many cards. So that's intriguing, right? Like just making a bunch of garbage and then swapping it out for later for better things is an idea that I don't totally hate. Not to mention, you know, I think Coin and Rock are both pretty good high rolls off of this as well. Like each of those do feel pretty rewarding. So it's like 50-50 on something I'm really excited about getting, stuff I'm maybe not as excited about getting, but still has some potential. And because you're getting 2 of them, you know, the 50-50 odds suddenly become a lot more interesting. Like you have a decent chance to get a Coin or a Rock at solid upside on at least one of these, which might make that 3 cost upfront nature worth it. But I'll be honest with you, Rogue is the class I play the least and have the least insights into. So I'm curious to hear if some Rogue players out there think this junk is worth it and you can turn it into enough upside or not, or if you just rather do faster, crazier rogue things. All right, so moving on to the Twisted Pack, another one of the 1 mana packs. This one adds 5 random cards from other classes to your hand at the end of your turn. You discard them. So we already talked a little bit about Gaslight Gatekeeper possibilities with this one. Speaking more generally to this card though, whether it has utility across the board, and maybe a utility in thief decks as well, I think that's actually pretty intriguing. This is one of the packs I think is the best in its own right without sort of shenanigans. Random beasts and random taunts in other classes didn't feel as relevant to me, but random cards from other classes does have some interesting upside. Not only the classic reasons, you know, getting access to things you otherwise normally wouldn't, but you have some thief payoffs. Remember, still in standard format for Rogue, we have Spectral Cutlass right now. Some people are making these really big. I mean, lately I feel like I've been dying to these from just damage output as opposed to like extra durability, but you know, in theory, this could be a few extra ticks on that. We've of course still got test stuff possible as well. Again, you know, I'm not seeing a lot of tests played competitively in standard format, but those possibilities do exist. More interestingly, you know, sometimes this can just generate like healing or board clears. Since you're getting 5 cards, you have a good chance to kind of get a different gamut of stuff. You know, you might get some damage sometimes, some board clears, some card draw. All of that's going to be pretty commonly seen amongst the 5 cards. They aren't spells specifically, so you know you are going to get some minions sometimes. If this was 5 random spells, I think this would be like 1,000 times better than it is. But even with minions in the mix, you're still sometimes going to get some spells as well that are useful and intriguing. So, you know, I still think this will need help to get there. I don't think the general utility is high enough. You know, it's going to be like 3 awkward minions and like maybe 1 good spell and 1 awkward spell. It's probably going to be hard to piece together an entire turn out of this, but finding something in a pinch with a 1 mana overhead just to kind of take a peek, you know, just spend 1 to say, hey, let's see what we got. Can we find something perfect in this moment? That's not really a big ask. And if you do occasionally find that perfect thing or even something solid to fill in some gaps, that might alone make the Twisted Pack worth it. Especially for a class like Rogue, who, you know, doesn't mind sometimes just weaving in some cheap spells here and there with the occasional payoff and upside on thief stuff. But again, I think like Gaslight Gatekeeper stuff might actually be the reason you play this in Rogue. Giants with big hands. And I gotta pull up that giant. I keep referencing the giant, but I honestly don't know his name. So I'm just gonna, you guys know the giant I'm talking about, but let's show him just to be safe here. The Playhouse Giant. Costs 1 less for each card you've drawn this game, right? So put 5 cards in your hand, swap them out, and your giant's notably cheaper. 5 extra discount on this guy thanks to the Twisted Pack. So next up for Rogue is the Dubious Purchase, a 4 mana spell. This one allows you to draw 3 cards and combo destroy a random enemy minion. So interestingly, you know, we had like Deadly Shot in the past. It was 3 mana to destroy a random enemy minion. So as long as you're comboing this, man, this 3 cards seems very efficient comparative to the old days. But I will say, you know, destroying a random enemy minion isn't usually great nowadays. You know, there's a lot of stuff floating around on board. This is going to be pretty spotty. It's, you know, very often going to clean up a 1/1 or, you know, 3/3 if you're lucky. There are moments though where people do have those like isolated titans out on board. It's just stuck out there, and you know, 7 health would be awkward, but a Dubious Purchase is pretty nice. And when you're getting, you know, 3 cards to go with it, that certainly feels like a pretty nice bonus. So I will say, you know, Rogue is usually pretty efficient. They like cards a little bit cheaper than this one and a little bit more kind of controllable, I guess. Like they like to, you know, chop things up, and this just seems a little bit too broad and a little bit too kind of guessworky for what Rogue game plans typically achieve. But the raw output on this might just help it get there, because 3 cards is a lot. Rogue has ways to discount things pretty notably, and the occasional bonus upside here on destroying something's cool. That said, I think this is one of those cards that's probably going to be more relevant when like randomly discovered or generated, and probably doesn't show up in as many deck lists as we might expect at first glance or compared to the old days. I bet Rogue likes cheaper, more flexible card draw that you don't feel like you have to combo and just comes with a lower, you know, upfront cost. All right, so now let's do some quick reviews. Rocket Hopper is a 3-star card. Murloc Grouse is a 4-star card. Wave of Nostalgia is a 2-star card. Flickering Light Bot is a 3-star card. Wacol is a 4-star card. Holy Glowsticks is a 4-star card. Dust Bunny is a 3-star card. Twisted Pack is a 4-star card. Dubious Purchase is a 3-star card. Yeah, there you go. That wraps it up for this review. We got one more set tomorrow, and then it's time to play some of these cards. Share your thoughts on these down in the comments below. Thanks as always for watching, and until next time, game on.